There we go. You're good.
You got it?
Yep.
Okay.
I'm going to remute everybody real quick here. everyone, welcome back. Hope you had an opportunity to get a nice fresh bottle of water or cold glass from your water cooler at your home or office, or maybe a fresh cup of coffee in preparation for Chris's next presentation, which I feel is a very important one, a review of the FDA and OSHA regulations for ozone. Chris, whenever you're ready, go right ahead, please.
Okay. I guess I'm the last person on the last day of the first virtual conference. That's an honor. I got to start it and I'll get to end it. This topic has been kind of bubbling, I think, no pun intended, for quite a while, as many bottlers have dealt with the issue of getting adequate ozone levels in their bottle sanitation. And it's taken something that the industry has lived with for decades and caused some of us to look at it a little bit closer in terms of making sure that we are fully compliant, because this is not only an FDA issue, but as you will see, it's an OSHA issue. So my presentation today is going to touch on 5 topics. I'll talk specifically about the FDA's regulations on ozone. Then I'll talk about OSHA's regulations. I think it's important to kind of make you aware of how ozone can be detected and how you can manage ozone, mitigate it. And then ultimately what the consequences might be if we're not effective in managing ozone in the workplace. So hopefully everybody's hearing me properly, and we'll see. Okay. So ozone, as you know, is kind of an electrified version of oxygen. It's unstable. It's kind of a blue gas, a little bit of a pungent odor. And it's typically actually very low concentrations in the air that we breathe. I mean, you could walk outside and you would be breathing some concentration of ozone, although it would be very slight. Ozone is, as we know, one of the most powerful disinfectants, over 50 times more powerful in disinfecting, say, versus chlorine, and works 3,000 times faster. So we know the impact of this, we know it works, but there is some downsides that we have come to manage over the years. First and foremost has been the problem that when ozone comes in contact with bromine, we get a conversion into bromate. Bromate is a cancer-causing chemical. It is regulated by the FDA, and we have to be very careful because it's kind of a weird chemistry. Probably need Steve Tischler to explain this one, but I can have 6 parts of bromine and I expose it to ozone and I can end up with greater than 10 parts of bromate. So I have to be very careful. I understand the quantities in the water so that I manage this effectively. Ozone has a long history. I didn't realize that, it goes all the way back to the 70s when the FDA first published a notice in the Federal Registry affirming that ozone was effective as a disinfectant in bottled water. In November of 1982, it was officially granted GRAS status, which means generally recognized as safe. This is a designation the FDA makes to chemicals that are supposedly pretty benign and pretty low risk. So, over what is amounted to, let's see, 20, 40, over 40 years, we have lived with ozone, we've used ozone, and everybody's familiar with the regulatory sanitation standard that says 0.1 parts per million of ozone in a solution for 5 minutes creates a contact time of 0.5. And that's what we need, that contact time of 0.5. And everybody has seen the presentations where if you don't have 5 minutes, which no bottle washer that I'm aware of does, so you speed things up, well, that means you've got to increase the level of ozone. And it's this increasing the level of ozone that has caused us to be a little bit more circumspect about how we manage this and how it may impact our employees. So Typically in bottled water plants, depending on how old your bottle washer is, how it was designed, how many of the jets are actually spewing ozonated water versus just clean water, we can run into ozone levels that are probably on the low side of 0.4 parts per million, and I've seen them be well over 1 part per million. And that's been to achieve that necessary sanitation level. So when we start crossing higher than 0.5, we begin to get a little bit more discernible ozone gas permeating in a bottling plant, or people getting a little bit more sensitive to it. So when these levels are higher or they're noticeable, well, this is where OSHA begins to show interest. And frankly, they have much less sense of humor when they visit you. Never lose sight of the fact that OSHA, by and large, not completely, but they significantly self-fund themselves. So that means the more fines they levy, the more fines they collect, the bigger organization they're able to create, and the more they're able to compensate themselves. So there is a self-interest in not only promoting occupational safety, but having it benefit the agency by their actions. This is different compared to the FDA. You know, the FDA is funded to operate, staff salaries are paid, research are done, and there's no bonus if the FDA finds a certain number of nonconformances or closes down a certain number of businesses. It has nothing to do with their budget. But in OSHA, there is a cause and there is a relationship. So what is this OSHA regulation and why should we be concerned about it? It's buried in something called 29 CFR 1910.1000. And it says the permissible exposure level, call that the PEL, over an 8-hour time-weighted average value of 0.1 parts of ozone per million parts of air. So administrative or engineering controls must be implemented whenever feasible to achieve compliance with the PEL. When such controls are not feasible to achieve compliance, personal protective equipment, that means respirators or other protective measures, shall be used to keep the exposure level of employees within that PEL. So they're spelling it out exactly how high that ozone can be in your work environment. And if you're not able to keep the level lower than what it needs to be, then you are obligated to provide respirators or other personal protection equipment to employees. Now, I think the good news is don't panic here, because 99 times out of 100 that I've run into, we are able to manage the ozone level and nobody's wearing respirators for the most part in bottled water plants. So, it's about time for an eye chart, and not to disappoint you. These pages are the actual regulations that OSHA has published regarding ozone. And they've got definitions and all kinds of technical terminology. I've read this countless times and I'm still a little fuzzy on what they're trying to say. But you'll see in the second column, there's actually a formula. Again, this is near and dear to Steve. It says E equals parentheses, C sub A times T sub A plus C sub B plus T times B, et cetera, et cetera. It's a very convoluted formula that they actually use in a workplace to determine if there is too much ozone or if it's okay. And again, you can see this regulation goes 4 pages. So, the question obviously is, what does this mean? Broadly, we're saying you've got to keep the ambient ozone level in your filler room or in the area immediately surrounding your filler where your people are working over the course of 8 hours below 0.1 parts per million. It gets too high, that's an issue. Gets too low, not a problem. So how do you know this? Well, again, we come back to this formula, and it's pretty complicated. but it's a function of taking your 8-hour workday and slicing it into little pieces and then measuring for each time increment how much ozone is literally in the air surrounding your employees. And I'm talking about the people that are standing by, they're loading bottles or they're pulling off fulls. They're in that general vicinity of the bottle washer and filler. If a OSHA inspector comes in, they're not going to put their detector at the door. They're going to go where they've seen people stand around and actually operate. So let's walk through this. We're in a bottling plant. It may or may not be in a room, right? Because nowadays we have these monoblocks. They sit out in the middle of the warehouse. So they'll pick that area right around the filler. We have people. We've got to have some way to measure it. And we don't want to lose sight, because it's very important that people take breaks and they occasionally leave the area. So we have to make some assumptions, because we don't have really sophisticated sensors here. And at the end of the day, we figure that, okay, so sometimes the ozone exposure is a little high, but other times it's a little bit low. And if I step away from the area, it goes way low. And if I get right up next to it, it can go high. And I've got to time this over the course of the workday. Okay. So you guys know I'm a great spreadsheet person. And what I did is I created a little Excel sheet. And if you send me a note, I'm happy to send this to you. There's nothing particularly proprietary about it. But you need to actually go in and measure in your production facility, what kind of exposure are my people getting? I mean, I don't think they're getting this 0.1. I don't have, I don't get hoarse when I walk in the area. My eyes aren't watering. I don't have employee complaints. But that's somewhat of a swag, right? I have never gone in and methodically measured it. And that's what we're talking about doing. So the fella comes in, the woman comes in, they start their shift at 8 o'clock in the morning. They work half an hour getting things set up. We look at the ozone meter and, we're really not even reading anything. Great. So we've got a half an hour of no ozone. Goes in the cumulative. Then we start bottling. The ozone starts running, gets into the air, and, we take our measurement. And all of a sudden, maybe that ozone in the atmosphere is up at 0.15. Could be 0.2. I've seen it 0.3. But most of the time, it's going to hover around that 0.1 when my bottler and my filler are operating full out. So however much time that individual is in the space, I'm going to take that, I'm going to multiply it times their exposure level. And you can see I'm going to go through bottling, and I'm going to give them a break. No exposure. They're going to start bottling again, then they're going to take a lunch break. Then they're going to bottle, then they're going to take an afternoon break. And they're going to bottle some more, and then they're going to start shutting down. So at the end of the 8 hours, I can add up these little pieces, and in this particular case, their average exposure over an 8-hour period of time was 0.08. I'm fine. I'm under that limit of 0.1. Okay. Now, I had roughly like 8 breaks here. I could split this into twice as many increments as I wanted to. It's up to you. If I look at another example, though, and I say, well, instead of that ozone being at 0.15, maybe it got up to 0.2. So now I could see a scenario, same kind of work schedule, same number of hours in the room, where they're actually exceeding the limit. Excuse me. So I can't tell you how your facility is going to work out. You're going to have to go and make these measurements. But you read from the regulations that OSHA's expectation is this is what you're doing. And I got to be honest with you, until I really started reading these regulations, I was not aware of their expectations. It was just one of these things. I didn't think we exceeded it, but now we're going back and we're actually going to try to calculate this. So what we know, real world, ozone levels come up and down pretty rapidly, right? A line stops for 5 minutes, Bottles are jammed, maybe the ozone gets a little high. We start resuming production, we're cranking along. You can barely tell that there's ozone in the air. When people take breaks, are they just standing around, breathing in the air, or are they leaving that space, going outside, getting fresh air? We might not have mattered before, but now I tell you that when people are on breaks, you want them out of the room. You want them away from the ozone altogether because you don't want to have to count that exposure time towards their daily limit. The other thing is, don't guess on this. I mean, most of us can pretty well tell if there's ozone in the air, but I couldn't tell you if it was 0.5 or, 0.4, whatever it happens to be. I just don't have that kind of sensitivity, and I don't think any of the rest of us do. So you're going to need to use some kind of scientific instrument that measures this pretty accurately. And you don't have to have continuous monitoring. I mean, you don't have to have somebody there with a clipboard and a stopwatch and a meter. But you should do this on, maybe 2 or 3 different days, maybe different times of the year. Because what you're trying to do is, if you got challenged and OSHA came in and they said, show me what you've done to make sure that you're not exposing your employees, you'd want to have something other than, I don't think it's a problem. You're going to want something to say, yeah, I've looked at this and truthfully, it's not a problem. So the other thing to remember is it's not just OSHA. And we probably have some people from New Jersey in the audience, and trust me, they've got ozone on the brain. They have issued a very extensive document specifically talking about occupational exposure to ozone. I mean, they have more detail in here than OSHA themselves do. So what this tells you is that there's a lot of different regulators that look at workplace environments. And, you might say, well, why do they even get the idea of paying a visit? And all this takes, as you're aware, is a worker raising concerns. And if they get to the right person, somebody in the New Jersey Department of Health and Senior Services says, hey, we better go out to such and such a workplace and see if there's any concern about ozone. New Jersey is the one who's kind of most in your face on regulating ozone, but I'm pretty sure that all the other states in the Northeast have some kind of state limit and state enforcement in addition to the OSHA requirements. And as I say, you can see that there's not only regulations, but they're advising you on what to do for clothing, eye protection, Q&A. These are relatively recent documents. These have not been around for the 40 years we've been using ozone. They may have been around more for the last 4 years. So it behooves each of us to understand what our states are doing. So, do you have a problem? I don't know. I don't want to scare anybody. I don't want you thinking that, oh my God, I've got a big issue. You may have no issue whatsoever. But what I would suggest to you is prudence would dictate that you'd want to go out and get some facts. So as we mentioned it, you can smell it, but at least at my age, I'm not that reliant on my ability to discern it. So I'm going to mechanically detect it. Because ozone does have an odor, and there's a threshold. I mean, I'm told that you get over 0.1, there's ozone in the air. But this is also analogous. Think back, the last time you went outside and there had just been a thunderstorm and you kind of took a deep breath, the air actually smells a little bit like ozone. And that's because ozone is naturally created during thunderstorms. When lightning goes through the air, all around it, when it comes in contact with water vapor, it creates ozone. It doesn't stay there for that long. It's unstable, floats away. But, so the smell of ozone when you see it, but you don't quite know how strong it is. And your employees don't either. So you don't want your employees thinking that there's a problem when there's really not one. So mechanical devices can sample the air. You can have a handheld unit or you can have a wall-mounted unit. Now, the accuracy is getting much better. When we first started purchasing detectors probably 2.5 years ago, we were hard put to get one that would measure down to 0.1 parts per million of airborne ozone. Today, readily available, reasonable cost, I can go down to 0.01 parts per million. So if I were purchasing new ozone detectors, that's what I would be looking for. And you say, what do these things look like and how much do they cost? Well, one that goes down to just the basic 0.1. So, I mean, you get a hit on it, you know there's something more than you want there. You can buy it for $340 on Amazon. Now, I've looked at a lot of different devices. We've tested a lot of different devices. And, you know, one of the better companies is one called Forensic Detectors. They're a US company, but they do import a lot of their electronics, both from Sweden, Switzerland, the UK, and some from China. This is the kind of thing where buying a low-cost detector doesn't help you. You know, good ones are not cheap. One positive benefit I'll pass along to you, and trust me, I have no commercial interest in this company, but since I've been working with them, if you use that code Ozone Dunn 10 on the Amazon website, you'll actually get 10% off right there on Amazon. I have no idea how many people have taken advantage of that, but every bit helps. This device, by the way, comes with a certificate for 1-year calibration. At the end of that year, you need to send it back to them, and I think it's $50 payment, and they'll recalibrate the instrument and send it back to you pretty much overnight. There is a new device. It looks essentially identical, but of course it's more than twice the price, but it does detect down to the 0.01. So if I were giving you a recommendation on a device to purchase to be able to sample in your bottling room, around your machine, this is the device that I'd recommend. It's $800 on Amazon. You'll get 10% off of that when you order it. You'll have it in 2 days' time. You know, the difference is, I'm told the electronics for this device are made in Switzerland. The electronics for the other device are made in the UK. It's just a higher precision instrument. You still have to recalibrate it after a year, but they're pretty easy to use. Now, in a lot of bottling plants, we like to put something on the wall that does continuous monitoring. So here's again a device from the same same detection limit down to 0.1, and it's $600. So what this does is when it exceeds the 0.1 parts per million, you get a flashing red light and you'll get a little bit of an alarm. It also has the ability to tie directly into a control system. So that 420 milliamp signal, that can drive a siren, lights. It could even turn your machine off. As you would expect, this device now comes in a new improved version where the detection is down to 0.01. The cost is up. Instead of being $800, it's now $1,200. But I think they'll still give you that same 10% discount. So forensic detectors is not the only game in town. There's another company that is called AeroQual. They make a very high quality device. It measures down to the 0.1 resolution, and I think it's only about $700. Now with this device, you have to buy a new sensor every 2 years, and that sensor is $325. Again, I have not personally used this device, but I've checked the reputation of this company online and several different places, and they seem to make a quality instrument. So I'd be very comfortable in recommending this device as well. And again, you could go out and I'm sure you can find others. You can talk to your ozone suppliers. But what you want to make sure is a couple of things. Don't buy a cheap device. And the reason is that cheap devices are kind of like a carbon monoxide detector in your house. once they're tripped, once they get saturated with that ozone, you got to turn them off for 8 hours before they start working again. So you want a unit that can clear itself out and be used continuously. And you really want to go down to that sensitivity of 0.01 parts per million. Because if you're measuring larger numbers than that, you're not really getting the accuracy that you need to know to be able to figure out that your environmental space is safe. And then again, expect to pay fees. Probably by the time you figure FedEx and everything else, it's $100. You have to do that at least once a year, if not more often, to get it calibrated. So you may or may not have an ozone problem, but let's say it's a little bit higher than what you'd like it to be. It might not exceed any particular range, but you might just say, gee, I'd like to lower the ozone if I could. How would I go about doing that? Well, it sounds strange in today's world, but it truly is part art and part science, because you have to know where is the ozone gas circulating in your room. I'm not sure if any of you have ever done airflow studies in your bottling plants. It's kind of tricky. This is where they get, they have a chemical that looks a lot like cigarette smoke, and you can vent it out in a very controlled way, and you will see literally how the air currents are moving around either inside your filler, inside your bottling room, or just inside the warehouse. So you can see, is it collecting in a certain area? Is it being sucked out of the plant? Is your ozonator leaking? I've had a situation where the ozone generator had a leak in it. And it wasn't very big, certainly, slightly bigger than a pinprick, but it was putting enough ozone gas out in the air in a bottling room to make your eyes water. So it could be the ozone contact tank. Again, depending on where it is, how it's constructed, when you're pushing ozone into an ozone contact tank, sometimes it needs a place to escape. And I've seen plants where that's just out through an air vent, and it can come right back into the room. I've seen other places where you take that ventilation hose and you take it outside the building. So you begin to get the idea that, no two facilities are the same. And I'm not saying that you need to hire a, HVAC engineering, but use a little common sense. And you can look up some tricks on the internet as to how to measure airflows. And you can figure out pretty quickly if the ozone is coming from your washer, is it coming from your filler, is it coming from the ozone generator, is it coming from the ozone contact tank, or someplace else, or all of the above. Understanding how the air movement in your plant works is pretty important. No two bottling plants are designed the same. Sometimes your air goes up and down. Sometimes it goes right to left. Sometimes I've seen fans that push air in, fans that suck air out. I've seen huge hoods like restaurants sitting over bottling machines, and I've seen open windows. Everything in between. And that makes it more complicated, right? Because it says that you can't rely on somebody just saying, do this and you'll fix it. You've got to go in and say, this is my facility and I need to understand it. And then, of course, there's the temperature issue, right? Because the hotter the temperature is, the faster the ozone breaks down and the faster it dissipates. Colder temperatures, on the other hand, cause it to linger and just kind of hang around. So you might not have any kind of issue whatsoever in the middle of the summer, but in the wintertime, you get people coming and saying, my eyes are burning, or, what's going on here? So don't assume that the levels stay the same year round. They really don't. Humidity will influence it. As humidity increases, the half-life of ozone decreases. So more humid air holds more ozone, and it lingers. Very dry air, and the ozone will break down quicker. So ask yourself, what's the humidity inside a bottling room, or a bottling plant for that matter? And, you kind of have to admit that it tends to be on the humid side. Not everywhere, but in most places, most of the time. So the air movement is really going to impact how long that ozone hangs around and how long it takes to break down. The more the air is moving, the faster the ozone breaks down. So at lower temperatures, the ozone molecules, they don't move very quickly. They don't collide, so they just kind of hang there. But when the air speeds up and there's more just random collisions, then the ozone breaks down faster. Okay? So you got a lot of moving parts to think about here. You know, this is a three-dimensional kind of conceptual model that you've got to look at. And you won't find two bottling plants that are the same, even in the same town. So what's the best environment? Well, high temperatures, high humidity, faster air movement. You're likely to end up with less ozone in the air around the bottling filler. It's more likely to move out away from your workspace. But if it's not moving fast enough, well, then what are your options? Well, you can destroy ozone, okay? The cheapest, fastest way is if you can pull that ozone through carbon, heated carbon even better, the ozone will break down to oxygen, all right? So if you go to somebody like Steelhead or somebody else and you pay them for a very fancy ozone destruct unit, what they're essentially giving you is a tower of carbon with an electric coil in it. And as the ozone rises through that carbon in the heated air, it breaks down to oxygen and removes the ozone. Okay, pretty simple. The other thing you can do is you can take a UV light and they sell them with a frequency of 240 to 280 nanometers. And it literally breaks apart the ozone and returns it back to air. Okay. Now, you know, that's different than a disinfection UV. Okay. So if you're trying to break down ozone with the UV, make sure that you've talked to your UV company and they've given you the right kind of bulb or the right kind of device. You can also filter the air. I mean, you just literally suck it in the end of a filter and it expels air that's free of ozone. So it just scrubs the air in place. And there are units available on the internet that will do 75 cubic feet per minute. There's ones that'll do, you know, 250 cubic feet per minute. And there's even ones, frankly, that will do 1,500 cubic feet per minute. You can mount them up on the wall. You can set them in a corner and they'll just, you know, draw that air in and, you know, just magically gets rid of all the ozone. So lots of different kinds of equipment and you really got to tailor it. So what do, you know, if you don't want to invest in all that? So this is a picture of an actual installation. And I have permission to tell you this is Billings, Montana. And that is a Steelhead 250. And you can see the ceilings aren't too high. So, you know, we every once in a while we get a little bit more ozone buildup than we'd like. So what we did is we literally cut a hole in the top left corner of the Steelhead 250. Where you see that pipe coming out, that was cut by a welder. We put a little flange on it, and then we clamped on a hose, and that's a centrifugal fan that sucks out 200 cubic feet per minute. And you can see it literally goes up and out the side of the window. Okay? Pretty simple. The plant people, I mean, they didn't do the welding. They sent that plate out to have it welded, but they installed all this and every part was ordered on Amazon. And it works pretty effectively. I mean, we don't have an ozone problem in this room anymore. I have another customer that has exhaust fans. Now you'll see these, you know, this is a 600 washer, so it's bigger, but the intent is the same. It's literally sucking out ozonated air so that it never makes it down into the room or, you know, it stays away from the employees. This is a lot easier and cheaper to do, you know, in a new construction. And, it works reasonably well. But it's kind of like a restaurant hood, right? It doesn't get it all because ozone could be leaking out from different places around that washer. It could be coming out the backs and the sides, and all this hood is getting is the top. This is another installation. This is a Steelhead 600. These are 10-inch pipes. We had Steelhead cut in the top of the washer. We put it down by the washer section and by the rinser section. And its sole purpose is to suck out the air that has ozone in it. And these go up into the roof and out to the side of the building. And they're pretty powerful fans, okay? This was not a cheap installation, but we had relatively low ceilings, so this was how we had to make it work. Now, what if you can't evacuate the air out of the room? What if you've got times of the year where, as much as I'd like to eliminate all the ozone, I just can't do that? What am I supposed to do then? Well, OSHA tells you right in the regulations, if you cannot impact the space, focus on the people. Now, we've gotten to know a lot more about face masks and respirators in the past 6 months than any of us ever thought we would know. So you can buy a reusable respirator that'll provide short-term relief or long-term protection specifically designed for ozone. 3M sells a half-face model. I mean, I've seen them on the internet for 20 bucks. The ones that totally encase your eyes and mouth for $200. Okay, these are made by 3M. It's not a cheap product. And then there are two sort of pads that twist and mount right on the respirator. When you literally take the pad and you can't see the back of them, but there's a bayonet fitting, and you simply attach them to both sides of the respirator. And when you breathe ozonated water or ozonated air through either one of these two pads, you'll notice 2097, 2297, they remove the ozone. They have layers of charcoal and some other media inside there that reacts with the ozone and either converts it to air or prevents it from coming in. So, again, there are very complicated, very sophisticated solutions, and there are fairly modest, fairly easy solutions. Or maybe it's a combination in between. You'll note on these pads, the 2297 is a little bit more expensive. It's because it uses a slightly improved technology. Something you want to look for in the pad, by the way, is this, it's called NOSH. It's like National Occupational Safety and Health Agency. It's a quasi-government agency, and they approve devices that are related to occupational safety. You will see a lot of other people out there selling other makes and models saying ozone reduction. I've spoken with 3M, and the only two cartridges that they will warranty are the 2097 and the 2297. Others say, well, it'll help, but they're not designed for ozone. These two are specifically designed for ozone. Okay, so what happens if I ignore this? Well, start with the obvious symptoms of exposure: coughing, throat irritation, burning eyes, discomfort in the chest, chest tightness, wheezing, shortness of breath. Okay, and if you've been in this industry for any amount of time, you've probably been working on a machine and you've probably gotten a lung full of ozone more than what you'd like. So I'm describing symptoms that you kind of maybe recognize. That's not healthy for anybody, right? So it's nothing that you'd want to have in your workplace. There are some respiratory, problems that can be caused by ozone. The good news is that most of the time they correct themselves within a day or two. They're not permanent. But, if you have somebody that has asthma, you really have an obligation to be more careful. And I think that we have learned in this world of COVID that respirators, respiration, air quality, all the rest, it's a lot more in your face than it's ever been before. So one of the things that I absolutely recommend now, and I put it in every one of my plans, is anybody who works in an area that has ozone, I make them read and sign this statement. Read and sign this statement. And I'm not trying to scare them, but I don't want them coming back saying, well, you didn't tell me about this. I didn't know anything about ozone. I'm not going to let somebody be in my plant and be in danger, but I also want them to be aware that, I don't want them down there sniffing the ozone gas, thinking that that's, a good idea. It's not super rich oxygen, right? It is corrosive oxygen. So they need to be aware of it, not to scare them, but just to make them mindful that like other chemicals that you have, in the workplace, there's a right way and a wrong way to use them and to manage them. So allow them to read this, allow them to ask questions, and then request that they sign it and keep this as part of their personnel file. Now, I'm not going to tell you that this is going to protect you from a lawsuit, okay? I don't want to give anybody a false sense of security, but it goes a long way towards transparency. And truthfully, at the end of the day, you want your employees to know that you understand their concerns, that you would never knowingly put them into a situation that would be harmful. But you also want them to have eyes open. And it's the same reason why you have safety data sheets, right? You don't expect anybody to drink chlorine bleach, but you have the protective measures, you have the information that God forbid anybody swallowed anything, here's what you do, and I'm going to tell you about the risk up front. Same way that you would educate somebody, never mix chlorine and quats together, right? So it's positive communication, it's transparency, and it's something I think we all owe our employees. So there are a lot of other resources on ozone. Probably the best one is the International Ozone Association. This is a nonprofit. I think it's a trade association. And they've got a lot of really good technical articles. Obviously, OSHA has information on their website. And again, those of you from New Jersey, your state government's done a wonderful job of promoting this topic, and there's information there. And I'm pretty sure that every state in New England has something similar. But don't lose sight of the fact that ozone is an oxidizer, right? This is the official symbol that you are supposed to use when you have ozone in an area. Now, frankly, I've never seen this in a bottled water plant. And until I did the research for this presentation, I didn't even know that there was a designated symbol. But again, if you went to OSHA's documentation and they said, what am I supposed to put up for ozone? This is actually what it would come back. And it falls under the same category as other oxidizers. Chlorine and oxygen and ozone. So, maybe this is something that we ought to spend a little bit more time and attention than what we have on the past. Now, I've gone through a lot of information here. It's a new topic. We haven't really talked about this in presentations before in this kind of depth. So I hope I didn't scare you, but I hope that, I want to flash back. I'm just going to quickly go back in these slides because I want to bring up the matrix of this sheet. Apologize for giving you vertigo. So I encourage every one of you, over the balance of this year to go back to your plant, construct a Excel worksheet with this kind of information. Now, again, this is kind of broken down into, longer segments, 15, 30, maybe an hour and a half. If you want to do this for every 5 minutes, you can easily do it with the Excel sheet function. It doesn't take any time. And then get some real data. And hopefully what turns out is there's no problem. You don't get anywhere close to the limit. But maybe it's an education, and maybe there's a little bit more there than what you thought about. But without doing this kind of calculation, I'm not sure that you can reach that conclusion. And then I would recommend, and I'll show you two of the sensors. So I would suggest, and I recommend, that you put this sensor near your bottling machine where people are working in every bottled water plant. This is the one that detects it down to 0.1 parts per million. It will flash a light, it'll sound a buzzer, and you can tie it into, a control system. This is your good faith demonstration to somebody like OSHA that you understand ozone, that you are monitoring it, and you're preventing it from becoming a workplace issue. If you simply want to measure the ozone in the air, then I would purchase one of these handheld devices. The advantage to this is that you can hold it right up to an ozone system or a washer and filler and see maybe exactly where that ozone gas is coming out, which seam is leaking more than another. That's the end of my presentation. So I would welcome any questions. And I'd also like to hear from any of you that have effectively managed this, in your own facility, and maybe have some ways that, we could benefit. So I don't know if there's any questions or anything.
Chris, I think there may be a few items in the chat. I don't know if you could see them on your end.
Got the Q&A. I have a hard time getting to the chat. Oh, wait a minute. Here's chat. Okay. So, all right, let me get down to my questions. Okay. So how complicated or expensive is the equipment to reliably monitor ambient ozone? Well, I would go back to, this device here. Sorry to give you eye strain. So this is the device by Forensics Detectors. It's wall mounted, so you can plug it in and it does continuous sampling from that device. And then there's also this device by AeroQual that's wall mounted. So I would use one of these two devices inside or near my filling, where I sanitize my returnable bottles, because that's typically the highest concentration of ozone that you're going to have in your plant is going to be from that sanitizing function. So round numbers, $1,000 to $1,200. See a note from my car. He's got one of these and it works. Joe Semino asks, do ozone badges work? No. The problem is that they have a fixed shelf life on them. You don't quite know when they start the detection. And once they're filled, you can't really reset them. So it's not quite like radiation. You're better off having a static device that you can put on the wall and not have to worry about it. And then it's continuously monitoring the activity anytime you're operating. Felix, I answered his question, the presentation. That's good.
Chris,
has anybody else dealt with this issue and devised some approaches that are...
Chris, does this equipment need to be put right next to where the person is, or can it be just in the same room?
It should be in the same area. So, if you had a large room, you would not want it to be on the far wall. You'd want it to be a place that's practical to mount it, without getting damaged, that's closer to where people are spending their time than not, right? I mean, the air is moving around in the room, so it's going to get a sampling, but, the closer it is to the people, in theory, the more reliable. I think in most of the places, I try to get it within, I'd say 15 or 20 feet of where the people are.
Hey, Chris,
Yeah.
Is the hazard substance fact sheet that you showed for New Jersey, you said it was relatively new, and should that be included in your set of food safety documents? I mean, I know it's not accepted in all the states, but is it something you would want to include in there?
I think it'd make an excellent addition to the notebook where you keep your SDS sheets. I think that's a great idea.
Okay.
Yeah. You know, I think that the key is, and you know, I'm not sure if any of us had done this before, but I think you really need to have this policy statement. And, you know, I can't remember which slide it is, but yeah. And again, I'm happy to share this document with anybody that wants it. It's adapted from some other guidelines from some other companies. And, you know, you've got to adopt it locally. Like here, I said that we have a handheld, you know, detector. If I had a wall monitor, I'd want to put that in there. And I'd want to have a conversation with each employee, especially when they're new and may not be used to this, just to let them know, hey, I mean, we've been using this stuff for more than 40 years. It's not an issue from our point of view, but, you know, in the interest of full disclosure and transparency, and, you know, everybody is so hypersensitive about things related to respiratory issues that, you know, if for no other reason than we're in COVID, I think that it's incumbent on all of us to make sure that, you know, we educate our employees as much as we can. Okay, it's the end of the day. People are tired. They're looking forward to that cocktail party, right? Tara, how many drink coupons do we get?
Yeah. Handing them out now. You'll have to come here for the drinks, though. That's the problem.
Yeah.
How many you need?
Well, and again, I mean, I would, you know, ask all of you, you know, if you have solutions for this, I'll just put my email up there. Well, I think I went too fast, too far, but wait a minute.
Could you put the respirator slide up for a minute?
Yeah, I just blew myself out of the presentation. Hold on a minute. This always works. It's like Murphy's Law, right?
Chris, while you're pulling that back up, I just
Okay.
wanted to make the comment that Pennsylvania DEP is pretty sensitive to ozone,
Yeah.
especially at bulk loadout stations where it's a smaller space. They do require that it's a wall-mounted monitoring system that either has an external alarm or has that 420 milliamp relay signal to an automated fan to escape the air if it, you know, reaches over, I think it's the 0.1 part per million ozone level in the room. So that way, you know, especially if you needed a driver or someone to go in for maintenance to the building, they don't walk into a high level ozone environment.
Yeah.
So Pennsylvania requires that in the permitting. They won't issue the operations permit unless that's installed.
Well, and again, I mean, you all are close to all these states in New England. If you come across a document or a regulation, I would very much appreciate it if you could email it to me. You know, I try to keep files on this information, and I don't think this will be the last time we talk about ozone. So I'd like to keep building this presentation with more practical information and frankly, examples. I mean, the 3 plants that I showed you, those are ones that I was directly involved with, but I know that there are a lot of you out there who have wrestled with these kinds of issues before and come up probably with much more creative approaches than what I've ended up using. So I think this is a great area to share some information on going forward. was it the respirators you wanted to see, or was it something else?
Yeah, that was perfect. Could I get
Yeah.
the filters too?
And then, and again, it took a long time, and you will find 40 different filters on the internet, and you'll find badges and everything else, and they'll all sort of say Ozone. But I was able to actually track down the product manager inside 3M in their safety division, and from his perspective, these are the only two that he would personally use himself. So I take that as a pretty good endorsement, and they're pretty moderate. I mean, it's a little tricky as to how long these last. And, you read the instruction manual and you say, I mean, should I change them weekly, monthly? And they have this great statement, breathe through it until you can't draw air. So it will literally clog itself up, with the ozone. I don't know, it absorbs into crystals or something. So my sense is that, it's going to depend on how much ozone, but you're probably going to have to change these things out maybe every week or so. You can buy them in bulk packages. I mean, they sell them typically in bulk of 100. So, their cost can be a lot more, a lot cheaper even than what they show here. All of this is available on Amazon. There may be other brands of respirators. I tend to try to, select national brands that, have some good research behind them. I trust 3M on their respiratory products. They're pretty well respected. But if somebody comes across something and, it's John Doe's respirator and it works great, I'd welcome the information. And, again, I will keep adding to this presentation as we get good, reliable information. I will also tell you that I've been working with, Dave Reddick of Steelhead, as we've taken the ozone levels up on sanitation to try to make their machines tighter. Same with their ozone systems. So, working with somebody like Steelhead or working with CapSnap or working with the ozone companies, they typically have a pretty good expertise in this area. So I wouldn't hesitate to reach out to them and ask for ideas.
Thanks for the respirator information. I appreciate it. That's great stuff.
Well, I thank you very much for your attention. I know it's late in the day, and it's hard to focus on small screens to see this kind of information, but I really feel like if there's any positive out of COVID, and it's hard to find any, it is that we have become a lot more knowledgeable about the air we breathe and how to mitigate it. So hopefully this learning will help.
Chris, thank you so much. That was a really excellent presentation. So many people are using ozone in their plants, and it definitely is an issue. Yeah. I know myself, if I'm around it for a long time, if we open a silo for CIP or something to that nature, within 30 minutes, I become immune to the smell of it. So it definitely happens. You become desensitized and you don't realize that you're probably inhaling a little bit too much of it. I know I get loopy,
yeah.
to say the very least, a little more giggly than my normal self. So definitely something to be aware of, and make sure that your employees are safe from that hazard.
Yeah, agreed.
So we are running a little bit ahead of schedule, but I do want to make sure that we all join back up here. Tara did send an email around to all the attendees, so any suppliers that are able to jump back in with us, that we don't want them to miss out on an opportunity to network again also. We said we would start the virtual cocktail reception about 4:15-ish, but obviously if you have your drink handy, Tara, if you've already run and made that margarita, toast it and we can get started. I'm going to run downstairs here in Jen's kitchen. She left me drink materials and she has already had to vacate the premises for another event that she needed to go to. So Jillian's here by herself. So
Oh, no.